All right, so are you ready to dive deep, seriously bold claims about Buddhism?
Always.
We're looking at this conversation between Pasan and Mystica. And Pasan, he's convinced that the Buddha Siddhartha Gautama wasn't from India, from Sri Lanka. And he's got some interesting evidence to back it up.
Yeah, it's not just a feeling.
Right. It's not just like, oh, I just feel like he was from Sri Lanka. One of the things that really got me was this whole Dvipa thing. It's a word that pops up all the time in Buddhist texts.
Right.
And it usually means, island or continent when it's translated.
Yeah.
But Pasan says that Sri Lankan texts use it way differently.
Really?
Like it refers to specific regions within Sri Lanka, which changes things up quite a bit.
Yeah, because everybody always assumes that Jambudvipa, the land where the Buddha lived, was in India.
Right.
But if Pasan's right about this whole Dvipa thing, then maybe we've been looking in the wrong place this whole time.
Yeah, you're saying the whole geography of where Buddha lived could be wrong.
It's a possibility.
That's huge.
It is.
Okay, so and it gets even wilder because he also points out that Sri Lanka is just packed with all of these ancient Buddhist temples.
Okay.
Way more than you would find in India.
Interesting.
So if Buddhism started in India, why aren't there just tons of ancient temples there?
Yeah, that's a good question.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it kind of makes you wonder if Sri Lanka's role in early Buddhism has been kind of, downplayed a little bit.
Yeah, I can see that.
Like maybe they were more central to everything than we've been led to believe.
Right. And then there's also the whole language aspect of it.
Okay.
Because the Tripitaka, those all-important Buddhist scriptures, were written in Pali.
Right.
And the oldest Pali texts and the script they used are much more closely tied to Sri Lanka than to India.
So are you telling me that the Buddha's birthplace and the place where he became enlightened and all of that is all in a line in Sri Lanka?
Yeah, so Pasan found that the 4 key places associated with the Buddha's life actually do line up in a straight line in Sri Lanka.
Did somebody go around with a ruler and a map back then?
Well, no, not a ruler, but the alignment is really interesting. And it's not just random either.
Okay.
These 4 places are specifically mentioned in Buddhist texts.
Okay.
And they say that you should go to these places and experience Sangave Upadavagan.
Sangvedi Upadavagan.
Yeah.
What is that?
Usually it's translated as like mourning or sadness.
Okay.
But Pasan says that that's not quite right.
So it's not about grieving at these spots.
Exactly.
It's like about tuning into Buddha's energy or something.
That's more like it.
Okay.
He says that sadness is actually a form of anger, according to Abhidharma.
Abhidharma, that's like Buddhism psychology, right?
Exactly.
So it doesn't really make sense for Buddha to tell people to get all angry at these really special places.
Right.
So back to Sri Lanka, Pasan, and Mystica. Start talking about this archaeologist, Jayarathna Pathiraarachchi. And this guy has been shaking things up since like the 90s. He's been doing all this really meticulous research on ancient inscription sites in Sri Lanka.
Oh, wow.
And documenting all this evidence that contradicts a lot of the mainstream interpretations.
So he's like a real trailblazer.
Yeah, he's a total fire starter.
I like it.
He's inspired all these other people to really question all this stuff we've been told.
That's so cool.
But here's the thing. Jayarathna claims that he remembers his past lives.
Okay.
And not just like vague feelings either. He says that he actually worked with the last 4 Buddhas, including Gautama.
Whoa, wait, worked with them?
Yeah.
That's a whole other level.
Yeah, like what did he do with Buddha?
Yeah, exactly.
That's the big question.
It is.
And then Pasan throws out this idea that maybe Jayarathna is actually a Siddhartha reborn.
A Siddhartha.
The sage who predicted that Siddhartha would become a Buddha.
Right.
So what if this whole uncovering the truth thing is like a karmic mission from way back?
Wow, that's intense.
Yeah, like lifetimes of purpose.
Yeah.
But okay, let's get back to the evidence.
Okay.
Remember that whole Dvipa thing we were talking about? Pasan uses all these specific examples from Sri Lankan texts like Heladvipa and Nagadipa to show how they refer to distinct regions within the country.
Okay, I'm following you.
So could Jambudvipa actually be a part of Sri Lanka?
That's a good question.
Are we all looking for Buddha's life in the wrong place?
Well, Pasan thinks it's possible.
Really?
He even mentions this British general who wrote about traveling to Jambudvipa from Colombo Fort.
Colombo Fort, that's in Sri Lanka.
Exactly.
Cool.
Now, I'm a show me the receipts kind of person.
Sure.
But it's definitely interesting.
Yeah, makes you think.
It does.
Okay, so I'm officially intrigued now.
Good.
Don't forget about the Pali language thing either.
Right.
Pasan really emphasizes how the script used for the oldest Pali texts has a much stronger historical link to Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
So it makes you think, if Buddhism started in India, wouldn't we see those ancient scripts there more prominently?
Yeah. It's definitely something to consider.
Especially when you think about how important the Pali language is to preserving the Buddha's teachings.
Absolutely.
So Sri Lanka having this strong connection to the language and the script, it really makes you wonder if we're missing a big piece of the puzzle.
For sure.
It's not just about language and geography either. Remember all those ancient temples we were talking about?
Yeah.
Pasan says Sri Lanka has tons of them.
Okay.
And each one has all this local folklore.
Right.
Connecting it directly to Buddha's life.
Like Buddha was here.
Right.
Uh-huh.
And it suggests a much deeper connection than just like, oh yeah, Buddhism spread here,
Yeah.
later on.
Yeah.
So if Buddhism really started in India and then spread outward, you would expect those like Buddha was here stories and all those ancient temples to be all over India too.
Right.
But that's not really the case, is it?
It makes you wonder.
It really does.
What's going on?
Yeah. So where did this whole India-centric view of Buddhism come from?
Good question.
Pasan and Mystica start talking about this book called Inscriptions of Ceylon.
Okay.
And it was written by this famous Sri Lankan archaeologist named Sanarath Paranavatana.
All right.
And apparently this Paranavatana guy was super influential. But Pasan thinks his translations of those ancient inscriptions were,
Yeah.
let's just say, a little creative.
A little creative.
Yeah. So you're saying this well-respected archaeologist was like deliberately twisting things
Wow.
to downplay Sri Lanka's connection to Buddha.
That's a bold statement.
That's a serious accusation.
Yeah.
So Pasan points out that Paranavatana often avoids directly linking certain inscriptions to the Buddha,
Right.
even when the original text seems to suggest it.
Okay.
So it's almost like he's bending over backward to fit this narrative that Buddhism is like an Indian import.
Yeah.
And remember, Jayarathna is the inscription decoding Indiana Jones.
Uh-huh.
He's been challenging Paranavatana's translations for years,
Really?
saying that they're just plain wrong.
Wow. So this is getting serious now.
This is like a big deal.
This goes way beyond just an academic debate.
Yeah.
If Paranavatana's translations are really that skewed,
Yeah.
then our whole understanding of Sri Lanka's role in Buddhism is totally messed up.
So are we saying that Buddhism is basically a Sri Lankan religion that got shipped to India?
Whoa.
That's crazy.
That's a complete reversal.
Yeah.
Well, Pathiraarachchi seems to think so.
Really?
Yeah, he says that if you peel back the layers of bias and mistranslation, you get this whole different picture.
Really?
One where Sri Lanka is at the heart of everything.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat here.
Good.
Give me an example.
Okay.
How does he back this up?
So he brings up this inscription that mentions the Lichavi court.
Okay. The Lichavi court.
They were like a super powerful group in ancient India.
Right.
And Buddha had some pretty important interactions with them.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. The inscription that Pathiraarachchi found puts the Lichavi court in Sri Lanka,
What?
not in India.
So all those stories about Buddha interacting with the Lichavis,
Yeah.
maybe those events actually happened in Sri Lanka.
That's what Pasan is suggesting.
My mind is blown.
Yeah, and that's just one example.
Okay.
Pathiraarachchi claims that there are tons of inscriptions that support his theory
Uh-huh.
with details that match up perfectly with the Pali canon.
The Pali canon, that's those Buddhist scriptures we were talking about, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so how could such a massive historical mix-up happen?
Well, it's a good question.
It's not like somebody just misplaced a sticky note.
Right. And Pathiraarachchi, he is fascinating.
Oh, from what I hear, yeah.
He's spent his life like really digging deep into these ancient inscriptions, artifacts, trying to find evidence that the Buddha's origins were in Sri Lanka.
Instead of India,
Not India, right?
as the story usually goes.
The traditional narrative, yeah.
Yeah, and this Pathiraarachchi, he's not just like some professor in an ivory tower.
Oh, no.
He's been in the trenches.
Oh, he's had legal battles.
Yeah, I heard because of his research.
I think Pasan actually called him the root of the movement and the fire starter.
Yeah.
It's like he's stirring things up.
Yeah. He's not afraid to challenge people.
And he's got people looking into this.
Yeah, inspired a bunch of folks.
A whole wave of people investigating these alternative histories.
So Pasan thinks it's a bunch of things.
Like what?
He says colonial influence,
Okay.
political agendas,
Uh-huh.
and just like a general reluctance to question the established narrative.
So people just kind of assumed that ancient and spiritual equals India.
Yeah, basically.
And that blind spot kept them from seeing what was right in front of them.
So what happens now? Do we all need to go and rewrite our history textbooks?
Well, Pasan definitely thinks so.
Really?
He believes that Sri Lanka deserves its rightful place in history.
Okay.
And that recognizing its role as like the central place in Buddhism, and who knows, maybe he's onto something.
Okay, so we've been talking a lot about history and archaeology.
Right.
And even past lives.
Yeah.
But let's not forget about, like, the heart of Buddhism itself.
Right, of course.
Pasan and Mystica get into this whole discussion about karma and merit
Okay.
and how those concepts play into Sri Lanka's spiritual significance.
Interesting.
So Pasan admits he didn't really get the deeper aspects of Buddhism
Okay.
until he started studying Abhidharma.
Abhidharma, that's like the hardcore stuff.
Yeah, isn't that some pretty intense stuff?
Yeah, Abhidharma is like the graduate level course of Buddhism.
Uh-huh.
It's all about analyzing the nature of reality, consciousness,
Okay.
the mind.
So if our brain is a computer,
Yeah,
Abhidharma is like the code.
exactly.
It explains how everything works on a deeper level.
Right.
And Pasan says this stuff really resonated with him. He'd always had a strong moral compass,
Okay.
but Abhidharma gave him like the framework to understand why.
So he discovered like the science behind the ethics.
Yeah, exactly.
That's cool.
And it made him respect the Buddha even more
Uh-huh.
because he realized that Buddha wasn't just spouting like moral platitudes.
Right.
He was teaching like a system of knowledge and practice
Yeah.
that was based on this deep understanding of how the universe works.
So Buddha was like a scientist and a spiritual master all in one.
Right. That's awesome. And Pasan wants everyone to experience that same kind of aha moment.
I can see why.
Yeah. He thinks Abhidharma has the power to transform people's lives.
Even today.
Yeah, even today.
That's powerful.
So he's not just trying to convince us that Buddha was Sri Lankan. He's like inviting us to really dive deep into the core of Buddhism itself.
I like that approach.
Yeah.
It's less about dogma and more about exploration.
Exactly.
That it should be about.
So speaking of exploration,
Yeah.
Pasan shares some pretty wild insights from Abhidharma.
Okay, like what?
Like, did you know that our skin doesn't actually feel pressure,
What?
but rather temperature differences? Yeah. So I'm not feeling the weight of my hand on the table. I'm feeling the warmth of it.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So that's what Abhidharma suggests.
Yeah.
And it explains why we don't feel a teardrop from our eye
Okay.
until it hits our skin and changes the temperature.
That's so weird.
Yeah. Pretty wild, huh?
Makes you think about all the things we take for granted about our senses.
Hold on.
What else are we misinterpreting?
Right.
So Pasan even uses the example of snakes,
Okay.
how they can hear without ears,
Right?
because they have all these receptors over their bodies that pick up vibrations.
Yeah. So their whole body is in here.
Right. It's amazing.
It reminds me of that time my cat found a lizard in my house.
Right.
I could barely hear a thing, but my cat knew exactly where it was hiding.
Yeah. Their senses are way sharper than ours.
It makes you realize how limited our human perception can be.
Absolutely.
And that's what Abhidharma is all about, right?
Yeah.
It's like challenging our assumptions.
Expanding our awareness.
And ultimately understanding reality on a deeper level.
So we've gone from history and archaeology to psychology and now even biology.
That's quite a journey.
This deep dive is taking us everywhere.
I'm enjoying the ride.
But it's not about just like accumulating all these random facts.
Right.
It's about connecting the dots,
Yeah.
seeing the bigger picture.
And maybe even changing the way we think about the world.
Exactly.
That's the goal.
This whole conversation's got me thinking, like, what if everything I thought I knew about Buddhism is wrong?
It's a lot to take in.
And it seems like Pasan and Mystica are just getting warmed up.
Right.
They get deep into this book written by Jayarathna.
Oh, yeah. Our inscription guy.
Yeah. You know, the guy who claims to have worked with past Buddhas. And Pasan's like, this book is the final nail in the coffin.
For the traditional narrative.
Yeah, for the traditional narrative. Wow. He's saying this book is like the roadmap to Sri Lanka's true history. It's revealing all these connections to Buddha's life that everybody missed.
So it's like Sri Lanka has been hiding its superpower this whole time.
Right.
I like that.
He says that Jayarathna is not just speculating.
Okay.
He's got the receipts, years of research meticulously documented,
Yeah.
all pointing to Sri Lanka as the real deal.
That's pretty convincing.
And Pasan even thinks that the Sri Lankan government needs to get on board.
What do you mean?
He's saying that they should be sponsoring excavations left and right. You know, following Jayarathna's lead.
Okay.
So after all of this diving,
Yeah.
where do we even go from here?
That is the question.
It feels like everything we thought we knew about Buddhism in Sri Lanka
Yeah.
needs to be reevaluated.
I think you're...
It's like we've been handed this brand new map, and now we have to explore this uncharted territory.
That's exciting, though.
It is exciting.
Who knows what we'll find?
What amazing discoveries are waiting out there.
The possibilities are endless.
So to our listeners, we leave you with this thought.
Okay.
What if everything you thought you knew about Buddhism was just the tip of the iceberg? What if there's a whole hidden history out there waiting to be discovered?
I like it.
We encourage you to keep exploring,
Yeah.
keep questioning,
Keep an open mind.
and keep diving deep.
Because the truth is out there.
It's waiting to be found.